Hi, it's Zealand from the future. When I first recorded this video, things were already bad, and then at the end of this video, I promise I'm going to talk about them getting even worse. This is recorded in two parts because right as it was about to come out, something else happened. But you'll find out what. I have some huge news, some absolutely massive news that might be emotionally overwhelming for some of you. Now, I am aware of the fact that the background of these videos changes a lot, right? And it had a lot to do with me being on the run, obviously. I mean, when you're on the lam, you know, you got to have all those different locations, which somebody did me the favor of keeping track of all of those in a Twitter thread, which I really, really appreciated because I was beginning to forget all the places I'd recorded from myself. But now that we've returned home, the background has changed again. You might have noticed it. You might not have noticed it. This is going to be a methodical process since we record multiple of these videos every single day. There's not just going to be one moment where I snap my fingers and the background is all in place. Okay, but there is a piece that has been assembled, that has been put in place on the wall. It will soon have stuff on the shelves and the lights on it and everything, right? But it is there. And we have gone from a background, which is a couch with a bunch of stuff thrown on it, which you can see over my... What is this, right shoulder? Yeah, it's my right shoulder. I don't know how it looks to you in the camera. To having an actual piece of furniture in the room that is going to be added to. Now, if you need counseling to help you get over the emotional damage that this sort of adjustment, this sort of change can cause, we're going to make counselors available. We'll leave the number in the description for... My webcam just died. So apparently the webcam is in need of emotional support as well. It's also probably evidence of the fact that I have been recording for too long today. I recorded so many things today because I finally ended up with a free day on my calendar. If you ever wondered what Wednesdays are for, it's for me recording literally everything. 23 hours of recording today. And we are finishing with this breaking news that the background has indeed been shifted, which is just tremendous. Overall, tremendous news. The background has been shifted. I'm incredibly excited, which is good. Hopefully, if you are French and particularly a Bordeaux fan, you can keep that excitement rolling because as we get to the topic of this video today, that didn't make any sense at all. As we get to what we're talking about today, it's sad. It's not very happy, and it is something that I am guessing is probably going to happen a lot more in the future, specifically in France. We've been talking about how their TV deals have been low, how there are huge clubs with massive fan support that are in France that just aren't able to fund their club the way that they're typically used to. And Bordeaux got relegated down to the second division, and they finished lower mid-table in the second division this past season. But the news has gotten far worse. You see, the news initially was not bad for Bordeaux. In fact, news had broken earlier this month, as this article in the New York Times states. FSG had confirmed they were in talks to buy the French club. If you're not familiar with who FSG is, that is, I believe, Fenway Sports Group. It's the team that... The ownership group that owns Liverpool, right? So this is a group of people with a ton of money, and they're probably looking at what the other, groups in the Premier League are doing, where you got things like City Group, you've got Chelsea owns a couple of clubs. And far as, I don't even know. FSG might actually own another club or two already, maybe even a couple, and they were just looking to add Bordeaux to their portfolio. But at the very least, they were interested in the idea of picking up a club in Bordeaux that has been 6-time French champions, by the way. But earlier this week, it was announced that they had withdrawn from discussions. For whatever reason, for not even the first time, FSG had failed to buy Bordeaux. And that basically that was the death's toll for Bordeaux as a club, which is sad. This sucks that this keeps happening to clubs. And honestly, I thought the whole era of FFP in the first place was designed to prevent this sort of shit from happening. Well, instead, they withdrew their appeal to the Direction Nationale du Contrôle des Gestions, the DNCG, which is what is basically in charge of club financial health in France. They had appealed against a ruling that they were supposed to be relegated due to being unable to provide evidence that they could afford the next season, right? And after this whole thing fell apart with Fenway Sports Group, Bordeaux just, what was the way that they worded it? Withdrew their appeal to the DNCG, essentially accepting the relegation that was being mandated by the DNCG. The club was unable to provide financial guarantees ahead of the 2024 2025 season, which just, it's really sad, man. And it's actually not as devastating as it could have been in 2021, when essentially the club was put into the same state. Bordeaux's been reeling for years, but in 2021, their American owners, King Street, they announced that they weren't going to financially support the club anymore. But then this like half Luxembourgish, half Spanish guy came along and bought the club and was able to save them from that administration. But Bordeaux basically couldn't pull off a magical escape act for a second consecutive time. But by this time, they had spiraled a lot closer to where they were going to end up anyways. Now, they're still going to be called to present their budget, to try and explain how they're going to be able to pay for stuff in the future. I imagine there's going to be some restructuring and some players and some coaches leaving. And that's that's just going to be a part of the process. My biggest concern, outside of the fact that I feel bad for Bordeaux fans, I mean, this is a big club in France that has gone into administration here, even though they were kind of rotting out from the inside for a little bit. But the concern is that this is not the last of it, right? Bordeaux got wrecked like a lot of clubs did going through the pandemic era, and just was never able to fully recover from that, and produced a pretty terrible season on the field that was just able to kind of drive that point home. But France in particular, more so than even Italy or some of the clubs in La Liga that are floundering financially because of derelict owners or something else, France is in a really perilous position, right? The money situation in France and the level the clubs are trying to compete at, it just is not possible for them to compete at that level and stay financially viable. And I think these sorts of things also prove that even with financial regulations in place, it is still possible for clubs to blow them off to such an extent that they become financially endangered. I mean, we're talking about a club of the size of Bordeaux that's looking at its accounts for the next year and is saying, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay for that. That's freaky. But unfortunately, with this specific case, it is just devastatingly straightforward. Bordeaux was running out of money. They knew where they were running out of money, and they needed FSG to save them. The club released a statement that said, while discussions had resumed in recent days, FSG representatives indicated yesterday, Monday, July 22nd, to FC Bordeaux, basically, and its shareholders, their desire not to follow through, despite the assurances provided by various stakeholders. Therefore, in the absence of new elements, they withdraw their appeal. So they're kind of shifting the blame onto FSG, some saying that they ended up specifically in this situation because they thought they were going to get more support from FSG. They thought it was more of a done deal than it actually was. But in these types of negotiations, FSG is looking out for its best interest, and Bordeaux is a sinking ship. And I would assume FSG essentially just made the decision that the amount that it would cost to patch that ship up was just not worth it for FSG. And so Bordeaux sinks. Not that far. It's basically like they just got relegated this season down to the third division. The real question is how much damage the financial restructuring is going to do to the club. And now it's time to get even sadder, because it turns out even though the relegation was just from the second to the third division, the financial problems at the club for Bordeaux were actually like completely untenable. They've renounced their professional status, which is just so unbelievably sad. We're talking about a team that won the double in France at one point, like in very easy living memory, that is now giving up its professional status. I mean, in 15 years, Bordeaux went from winning the league to ending up with absolutely no professional players left on this team. Because it's one thing to be sent down to the third division. It's another thing to give up your professional status. This is like such a bigger step. Basically, what it means is that all the professional players of the club are going to have their contracts ripped up. They become free agents. They can go wherever they want. This is a huge loss of value, obviously, for the club. It means they're going to have to completely rebuild the team from scratch. It also means that they're going to close the club's training center, which, I mean, look, Bordeaux may be able to work its way back up to the point that it's supposed to be at, but for all intents and purposes, this is the death of the club. The Bordeaux that is able to rise from the ashes will not be as much of a continuation of the old club as a new club that is built up again. All of the players are gone. The training facility is being closed. 15 years after winning France, we now have a club that is unable to sustain itself in any way as a professional team. This was their official statement. It said, following the confirmation of the DNCG's decision to relegate Bordeaux to National 1, the club filed for bankruptcy with the Bordeaux Commercial Court in order to begin the necessary restructuring. Consequently, the Commercial Court will very soon pronounce the opening of collective proceedings, which will automatically result in the loss of the club's professional status. Therefore, given the very short deadlines before the start of National One, the club had to give up requesting the maintenance of its professional status. Otherwise, it would have had to appear again before the DNCG with a budget that did not correspond to the future reality of the club, which would have led to heavy additional sanctions. So they're basically giving up their professional status to avoid being sanctioned anymore. It is a difficult decision which anticipates an inevitable consequence of the ongoing restructuring process. Although the training center will close as a result, the club will continue to promote youth teams. The effort of transparency vis-a-vis the French football authorities of what the real situation the club will be in the days and weeks to come, most in particular, make it possible to limit the sporting consequences of this situation. The club have the objective of evolving in National One next season to allow as quickly as possible the return of the club with the cleaned up finances and renewed ambition to the highest level. But obviously, losing your professional status as a club and losing your training center is going to make it a lot harder to do that. And if you're being entirely realistic, all of the advantages that the type of big club that Bordeaux is, dropping down to the third division, would traditionally have, in the same way that other big clubs that have been yeeted down the divisions before, whether it be Leeds or anyone else, a lot of those advantages are now gone, right? You don't have these holdover players. Sure, you might be able to bring up players through your youth teams that were doing, you still have a league-all-level youth system, right? At least some of those guys are still around, so you might be able to bring them through, but none of those actual senior professional players are there anymore. You don't have the training facilities, right? And you're just not going to have the general operational budget that normally a club of Bordeaux's size going down to the third division will be able to rely on and lean into in order to get itself promoted back up the divisions. It's a tragic situation, and the people you have to feel bad for the most are the fans. I mean, the players, their contracts are terminated. They can go somewhere else. It's not like they're locked into a situation where they're plummeting down the leagues here. But the fans, you now have a club that, you're celebrating in the streets 15 years ago winning the league. Let's say you're 30 years old. You were 15 when that happened, and now at 30 years old, you're watching your club lose its professional status entirely. Now, I don't know the situation with Bordeaux Stadium, but the one advantage they might be able to keep is that hopefully they can sell a lot of tickets in order to try and build this club back up. But I think it's a crime. I honestly think it is a crime when things get to this point. I really, really do think I know it's not actually a crime, but it feels like a crime. I mean, this is a robbery. It's a robbery for all of the fans of a club like Bordeaux who are being robbed of the opportunity to root for their sports team. Now, I realize the United States gets a lot of shit for the way that its sports leagues are set up, their closed systems and everything else, and sometimes those sports teams move. But at least in the recent history of all major sports in the United States, the sports teams don't fold. They don't just disappear. You don't just stop rooting for them, right? You live with that different fear of the team moving, but the team itself still exists. Now, I love promotion and relegation and everything else, and there are ways to survive promotion and relegation without putting yourself into dramatic financial peril, but there just seem to be far too many people willing to take far too many risks with these types of clubs, and then they just end up getting absolutely buried, and then somebody else ends up holding the bag. It's always somebody else that ends up holding the bag of the clubs like this because somebody tries to save them. And it's, honestly, if it was that easy to do it, then a lot more of these clubs would be saved. It's a shitty situation, and I'm not optimistic at Bordeaux being able to quickly appear in Ligue 1 again, but I hope that they're able to put together a team that's able to make that possible. I hope.